Adashi Cornaro was a 23-year-old Asadi born in Nidian, lost, alone, and afraid. She is commonly known as the High Priestess of the Twin Dragon Faith, this being her main occupation, who is heavily affiliated with the Gaians. The story goes that just before the collapse of Rugo, an egg from the Devrim Asadi unexplainably ended up upon a trade wagon heading to the continent of Sparwood. This egg eventually fell out of the caravan in the continent of Nidian and was undiscovered by the locals in this area. Many days after the egg had found its resting spot, it would hatch into a young Asadi, lost and afraid. She traveled aimlessly across the land, scavenging what little food there was and taking refuge in whatever shelter she could find. Eventually, her travels would bring her to the small town of Labbit, a once abandoned town being repaired by a tribe known as the Gaians. She was taken in by them and eventually joined them following their mission to protect the beauty of the overworld. Time in Uldarash, imprisonment in Chevkri. Asadi are often known for their limited understanding of modern society concepts such as possession and etiquette. This trait was retained upon the young Asadi who survived off of petty theft when times were rough. One day, during a Gaian mission in the continent of Haven, she was arrested by the police force of Chevkri, a state in the Second Empire of Uldarash. It turned out that during her short stay in the continent, the Asadi had broken many rules and had been sentenced to jail time. Adoption. Partway through the Asadi sentence, a Montroigan man by the name of Thomas Cornaro pitied the young bug and offered to adopt her while still in prison. She accepted, and from there on out was recognized as a member of the Cornaro family, taking on the name of Adashi. During this time, a goblin by the name of Corelb attempted to marry Adashi in exchange for being set free. Thomas Cornaro stepped in and stopped this from happening. Release from prison. Following Adashi's adoption, her new family worked hard to have her sentence lessened, sending appeals to the courts and waging a legal battle. Eventually they succeeded, and Adashi was released on parole. After her release from prison, she would spend a short period of time with her new family before returning to the Gaian tribe. During this time, Adashi would become religious, becoming highly dedicated to the Sisters of Peace. Return to Nidian. After bidding farewell to her family, Adashi Cornaro returned to the town of Labbit, helping the Gaians rebuild it once more. During this time, her dedication saw her highly liked by fellow members of the tribe, eventually leading her to becoming their de facto leader, an event that would lay the path for future tribal reforms and restructurings. This would lead to the hierarchical system present in the tribe today. Converting to Twin Dragon. While working on Labbit, Adashi was approached by a visiting celestial elf from the Arlenor Valande. The visitor introduced herself as a high priestess for the Twin Dragon Faith, and provided an impromptu sermon for the Asadi. Utterly swayed by her preaching, Adashi converted to Twin Dragon a mere 2 days after the Lurin, and began to establish the faith among the Gaian tribe. Disagreement in Sudaran. The positioning of Labbit resulted in the Gaians and eventually Labbit's new citizens being dragged unwillingly into geopolitical issues. Partway through the restoration of the town, the Fourth Empire of Asharia was vassalized by the Uraka Imperium following the Entente Auroran War. Shortly after, the Duchy of Sudaran declared independence from Asharia, resulting in Labbit becoming a town in the new nation of Sudaran. Adashi Cornaro and the Gaian tribe would clash many times with the Sudaran government, the most significant of which was over Adashi's plans to build a temple to the Twin Dragon Faith in Labbit. This choice conflicted with Sudaran's monotheist religious outlook, which led to heated debate between the Sudaran leadership and the Gaians, superheaded by Adashi herself. The talks eventually resolved with a treaty signed allowing Labbit and the Gaian tribe to enjoy religious freedom, but the sides still retained differing ideals, and various arguments would continue to occur until many months after Sudaran merged with the Duchy of Asharia to form the true Empire of Asharia. During the events that transpired between Labbit and the rest of Sudaran, Adashi Cornaro was infected by a spore blossom plant. The infection quickly overtook her body, releasing compatible pheromones that compelled her to cultivate and grow more spore blossoms in a parasitic relationship. The infection also resulted in a small, non-sporing blossoms of the same plant to grow over Adashi's exoskeleton, resulting in her signature appearance. Neither the flowers nor the infection itself appeared to have any significant effect on her well-being at the time, and instead served only to spark a newfound desire to grow more plants in the Asadi. Establishment of Adnan. Adashi Cornaro eventually shifted her focus from her work for the Gaian tribe to the history and future of her own species. She embarked on a trip to Eldham after her work at Labbit was completed, and learned about the cultures present there, even attaining a citizenship for the Valordom of Vulpinia. The nation would later merge with Nodos and become known as the Vulperium, a name that remains to the present day. Taking a liking to the nation, she requested permission to create an independent town with the mountains east of their capital, and was granted her wish. She then began to construct the town of Adnan, which was intended to serve as her hive and a safe place for other insectoid races such as the mothling and the afari. Upon completing the hive, Adashi sought out a chemist with a very specific request. The aforementioned chemist was able to synthesize the pheromones that triggered an Asadi's development into a queen, which allowed Adashi to become the first Asadi queen since the fall of the Devrim Asadi tribe. Along with the significantly lengthening her quickly waning lifespan, her transformation allowed Adashi to lay eggs and raise children, a dream come true for the Asadi. She would rear hundreds of young Asadi in Adnan, caring for them and teaching them the ways of modern society. Return to Rathnir. Adashi would eventually return to Rathnir to continue her work on the restoration of her species' history. She started by reclaiming the now destroyed city of Rugo and reuniting the remaining Devrim Asadi, imploring them to re-establish the once great Asadi city. With restoration well underway, rumor got to the rest of Rathnir, and eventually assortments of Asadi and sympathizers began to visit, slowly returning to Rugo to its former glory. She would also visit Labbit every now and then, watching the small town expand. One day, while Adashi was wandering around the continent of Siltor, she was ambushed by a bandit and stabbed many times, being left to die. Amazingly, she survived the encounter and returned to her work. However, when she visited Labbit the very next week, the citizens of the town realized something was wrong about the Asadi. In reality, the infection had begun to fully set into Adashi Cornaro, slowly decaying her musculature and replacing them with vines and plants that had muscular function and connected directly to her nervous system. Allowing her to retain all her capabilities for movement, Adashi herself never noticed the infection and was thus unbothered and unaware of its development. Death. While heading through the fields of a green pasture, Adashi was greeted by the view of what she considered to be an extraordinarily unsightly wall. A combination of her ideals to preserve nature and her natural Asadi instincts to tunnel resulted in her destroying the wall, an action that sealed her fate. The people of the city that was protected by the wall were furious at her actions and sent both their guard and a large militia of hired mercenaries after her. She was caught just outside of Rugo and apprehended by the river of Adman. The city itself had already garnished a distaste for Asadi and decided to summarily execute Adashi. They dragged the Asadi queen to the middle of the river and forced her under. As horrified Rugo citizens looked on, unable to help, she was drowned within the river over the course of 2 hours, being plunged in headfirst over and over and over again. As death approached and the Asadi's desperate struggles began to slow, her last thoughts were of the cruel irony of this world. Here she was, doomed to die by the very natural world that she had sought to preserve. 2 hours and 12 minutes after the start of the execution, the Asadi went limp. Adashi Cornaro, queen of the Asadi and matron of the Gaians, was dead. Her body was left to decompose in the river, where the pheromones that would have triggered another Asadi's transformation into a queen were washed away forever. The body was never recovered, and her friends and family were never able to wish her a proper goodbye. So ended the tale of Adashi Cornaro.